Welcome to part 2 of our Coconut MIDI game Unity lesson. We're going to continue right where we left off. We had reached a point where we could throw coconuts when we were standing on the trigger mat in front of our coconut shack. But we needed to add a GUI texture to show a crosshair sign in the middle of our screen to help with our aim, and we needed to add a GUI text object to give a hint to the player to let them know what they're supposed to do. So let's do both of those things now. First, let's create and add the crosshair GUI texture. So in your project window, go into the book assets folder and then go into the textures folder and look for the texture called Crosshair. In the inspector, we're going to need to make sure that our texture type is set to GUI, and we're going to make sure to click Apply after you've set the texture type. Then, while we still have the crosshair texture selected in the project view, go up to Game Object, Create Other, GUI Texture. And when you do that in your game view, you'll see that you now have a nice crosshair sign smack in the middle of your scene, which is just where we want it to be. However, when we start playing the game, we don't want that crosshair sign to be sitting there in the middle of the screen the whole time. We only want it to show up when they are able to shoot coconuts, and that's what our script that we wrote before is going to do. So let's make it so that we can't actually see this all the time, and you can do that by going over to the inspector, down to the section where it says GUI texture, and just deselect the little checkbox there, and your crosshair will disappear from the scene. Now let's add some text, some hint text. So we're going to create GUI text. So now go to the main menu, go to Game Object, Create Other, and choose GUI Text. When you do that, in the center of your game view, it won't show up in the scene view, but in the center of your game view, you'll get a very small bit of text in the center of the screen. What we're going to do is make a few changes to the settings for that GUI text. First of all, we're going to rename it. So over in the inspector, rename that text hint GUI. And we're going to change the anchor to be middle center. That will just position it nicely. And we're going to change the alignment from left to center. So when we use script to add different text for the hint, that text will be centered right nicely in the middle of the screen. And in fact, it will show up just beneath our crosshair object. Finally, let's change the font size. I'm using Arial font, and with my specific kind of font, 24 size font is a good size. Alright, so we've got all of that set. But just like our crosshair, we don't really want to see this GUI text sitting there at the beginning of the game. And so in the inspector, if you go down to the center where it says GUI text and just deselect that box, then that text will also not appear until it's made to appear through script. And let's set up that script now. We need to do a couple of steps to make that text hints appear. The first is that we need to have a text hints script to actually do the showing of the hints. So let's create that. Over in my project view, I'm going to click on my scripts folder, and then I'll click the Create drop-down box and choose JavaScript. It will then add a new JavaScript into my scripts folder, and I'm going to rename that script Text Hints. And once I've renamed it, double-click to open it in MonoDevelop, and then paste in the code that you'll find on the Blackboard site. I'll walk through it very briefly. First, we're setting a private variable that is going to be a counter, basically, for a timer. We're setting it to 0 for 0 seconds, essentially. And we have an update function, and we're going to check if that text object that we just created is visible, if it's enabled on the screen. And if so, we're going to start the counter. And then we're going to check that counter and make sure whether or not 4 seconds has passed. If 4 seconds have passed, then we're going to disable that GUI text object so it no longer appears on the screen, and we're going to reset our timer back to 0. And then we've got another function, which is the show hint function. This is actually going to get called from elsewhere, from another script in our program. And all we're doing here is taking in a message that's being passed to this function, and then if the GUI text object is not enabled, then we're going to enable it, which would cause it then to appear on the screen. Once you've got all of that set, to close out your Mono Develop, come back into Unity, and then we need to attach this text hints script to our text hints GUI text object. So just click and drag and drop it on there. Okay, and if you select that text hints GUI in the hierarchy in the inspector, you'll see that there it is. Now it's on there. So now we've got a script that will show the hints, but now we need to assign that crosshair object and the GUI text object back to our throw trigger script. Remember, we had a script connected to our mat object, and that mat object script would detect if the player was standing on the mat, and if so, then it would show the crosshair, it would show a hint, and it would allow them to actually throw the coconuts. So I've selected in my hierarchy view the mat child object of the coconut shy object. And then over in the inspector, I'll come down to the throw trigger script, and then I'm just going to drag over my crosshair GUI texture object and drag over my text hints object as well. So here's my crosshair object, click, and I'm going to drag that and drop it over there. And here's my text hint GUI object and drop that in there. Now at this point we can test our scene. If I come over now to the coconut shed and I step on my little thing, then I get a nice notice and I see a crosshair, and after 4 seconds the hint notice disappears, but the crosshair remains until I step off of the mat. Each time I step on that mat, unless I've won the game, I'm going to still see that hint message. Next, let's add the target objects, the objects that we're going to throw our coconuts at, as part of the game. To do that, I'm going to make sure that my view in the scene is positioned fairly close to my coconut shed, coconut shack, just to make things a little easier when I go to position my target into that space. Alright, but first let's do some settings for the target model so that it will look and work correctly when we bring it into the scene. So in your project window, go to the Book Assets folder and then expand out the Models folder and select the target object, or the target model. Then look over in your inspector, and we're going to do a couple of settings. First, make sure that your scale factor is set to 1, and be sure to choose Generate Colliders. And with the target objects, we have some animations. So in the inspector, I want you to scroll down till you get to the animation section, and you'll see a table with name, start, and wrap mode and loop. Here's where we're going to add the animations that we have created, or that were created when the target model was made in a 3D modeling program, and we need to tell Unity how to make use of the existing animations that are already on this object. So to do that, click the little plus arrow inside the table, and the first animation is in fact idle, so we can leave that name as is, and the start frame is number 1, but the end frame is number 2, and then we'll leave wrap mode and loop as is. Click the plus arrow to add another animation. This one's going to be called down, and the start frame is 3 and the end frame is 13. Click the plus arrow one more time, and the last animation is called up. It does start on frame 14 and it ends on frame 35. Once you've done all of that, in order to make sure it's going to work, you've got to make sure to click that apply button to apply all of the settings that you made to that target model. Now we've got the model set up so we can drag it out into our scene and place it inside our shack. Put it sort of closer to the, I'll put it about halfway back, I guess. I can zoom in on it, take a look at it, and you'll notice that it is it's backwards, basically. we need it to be facing the other way. And if I want to make my life easier, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this target object and I'm going to place it as a child object of that coconut shy parent. It'll just make it easier to keep track of where it is. So I'm going to take it and drag it up here and drop it on the coconut shy object, and you'll see now it appears as a child underneath that. And I'm going to set the position to 0 and 0 and 0. Okay. You'll see that sort of moves it towards the front, so I might change the Z value a little bit, place it about halfway back. Maybe I'll make it like minus 2.4. It sets it about halfway back. And I need to change the rotation because right now it's facing the back wall. So I'm going to change the Y rotation value to 180 so that now it's facing the front. And last but not least, I want to deselect the Play Automatically option under the Animation section for the target object. Otherwise, what will happen is that those animations that I've attached to that object when I imported it will just start playing as soon as the scene begins playing. So you'll see the target all by itself go down and then come back up again. All right, so in which we don't want it. We only want it to be playing when it gets hit with a coconut. Next, what we need to do is we need to set up this target object to react to realistic physics so that when the coconut hits it, the animations will play and it will fall down the way we want it to. So here's what we're going to do. We need to expand out this target object in the hierarchy. Then we need to go down to the part where it says target pivot, and we're going to expand that part out. Then you'll see that underneath this target pivot object there are 3 child objects: target, target support 1, and target support 2. We're going to apply rigid body components to each of these objects. So I'm going to select the target object and choose component from the main menu, physics, and rigid body. Now we want the physics here not to react to gravity. Instead, the physics will be triggered through code. So I'm going to come over to the inspector and I'm going to deselect use gravity and I'm going to select is kinematic. And I'm going to do those exact same steps for target support 1 and target support 2. So target support 1 I select, component, physics, rigid body. Come over to the inspector, deselect use gravity, and select is kinematic. Target support 2, component, physics, rigid body, deselect use gravity, and select is kinematic. Alright, we're getting closer. Our target object is almost ready to go. We need now to have a script so that the target will detect when a coconut has hit it. So we're going to create yet another script. So go over to your project window, select your scripts folder, choose create and JavaScript. That will create a new script that you should rename target collision. Once you rename it, double click to open it up in MonoDevelop, and then paste in the code from this script on the Blackboard site. I'm going to walk through it very briefly. We've got a private variable that is set to false, saying whether or not the target has been hit by a coconut. We've got something called a variable called target root, basically, which is going to help us identify which animation should be played, or which part of the game object contains the animation that we want to play when the coconut hits the object. Then we're going to have a sound when it gets hit. We're going to have a reset sound, and we're going to have an amount of time that passes before the target resets. And by reset I mean that an animation will play that will, when the coconut hits the target's going to fall over. And after 3 seconds the target will then pop back up again and play a reset sound. We've got a start function that's helping Unity know what is the sort of root game object, and that's the thing that contains the animation that we need to play. So it's a way of pointing to the animation that we're going to play. We've got an onCollision enter function that's just checking whether or not the thing that's hit the target is a coconut, and if so, we're going to start a coroutine. That's this function right here, the target hit function. So if the target is hit by a coconut, we're going to play the hit sound. We're going to play the down animation. We're going to set the been hit variable, private variable, to true. We're going to increment our coconut win targets variable. That was a script we haven't written yet, but we're going to write it and attach it to another object. And in that script that is yet to be written, there's going to be a target variable, and we're going to increment it. And then we're going to yield. Basically, we're going to wait for 3 seconds before doing anything else with this target. And then after 3 seconds, we'll play the reset sound. We'll play the up animation. We'll set the been hit variable to false. And then we'll if we get to this point, we're going to then reduce the number of targets that have been hit. Or the logic in this is that all 3 targets have to be hit before 3 seconds has elapsed, basically, in order for us to reach our goal, which is a total of 3 targets hit in this coconut win script. And then last but not least, we're letting the script know that we're going to have sounds associated with it. So once you've got all of that saved, you can close out your MonoDevelop and come back into Unity. Now we've got to attach this target collision script to the appropriate object. And if you don't hit it, if you don't put it on the right object, then it's not going to work for you. But that's no problem for us, because we'll put it in the right space. So let's go ahead and do that now. Once you've closed out your script and you're back into Unity, go into the coconut shy game object and then come down to the target object, the one that we've just been working on, and expand it out. And then go down to the target pivot child object, expand that one out, and then finally underneath that one you'll find another child object also called target. And if you look in your scene view, you'll see that now that round target model is selected, and that's where we're going to attach our script. So let's go ahead and do that now. in your project window, find the target collision script and drag it over onto the target game object. Once you've done that, look over in your inspector and you'll see there are a couple of variables that need to get set, our hit sound and our reset sound. We're going to go back into our book assets folder and in the sounds subfolder, and then scroll down until you find the target hit and the target reset sounds and drag them over to the appropriate place. The target hit sound goes to the hit sound variable and the target reset goes to the reset sound variable. Now we've got our target object all set up nicely, but in our game we're going to actually have 3 targets, and the player needs to knock down all 3 targets in less than 3 seconds in order to get enough points to get the power cell object that they need to get into the outpost. So let's duplicate our target object a couple times to create our 3 targets. Select the target object in your hierarchy view and right-click and hit duplicate, and then hit right-click again and duplicate one more time. Then use your arrow tool to drag one copy of the target off to the left-hand side and the other target off to the right-hand side. At this point, you've got 3 targets that can be all knocked down, but we don't yet have any script that is going to keep track of whether or not the player has gathered enough points by knocking down all 3 targets in the time they are supposed to in order to get the power cell and get into the outpost. So let's build that script now. In your project view, select your scripts folder and then hit create and JavaScript. Rename the script Coconut Win, and then double click to open the script in MonoDevelop. And once it opens in MonoDevelop, let's take a quick look at what's happening in the script. We have a static variable that is going to be an integer that tells how many of the targets have been hit. We have another variable, have1, that tells whether or not the player has already won the game or not. We've got a win sound audio clip, and then a game object that we need to assign to the power cell prefab that we created way back many lessons ago, so that the script will instantiate a new power cell that the player can pick up to get into the outpost. Then we have an update function that's going to check first if the player has gathered enough targets, or if they've knocked down enough targets, and if they haven't already won, then we'll reset the targets that have been hit back to 0. We'll play the win sound. We will instantiate a new copy of the power cell prefab and place it in the right spot. And then we're going to trigger the have1 variable so that we know the player's already won the game. Last but not least, we'll require an audio source for this so that we can play that win sound. Once you've got all that set up, go back into your Unity project, and we need to attach the Coconut Win script to the correct object in the world, and what we're going to connect it to is the Coconut Shy model, the very top level. So click and drag and drop it over there. And once you've done that, take a look over at the inspector, and we're going to set a couple of variables. First, we need the win sound. So go back again into your sounds folder in your book assets inside the project window and scroll down until you find the win cell clip. And we need to tell the script which prefab to use, which is going to be the power cell prefab. So find that in your project view, your power cell prefab that you created several lessons ago and drag that over to the cell prefab. Now with all that done, we can test our game to see if it all works and to find any errors. So let's save our scene and give it a try. Here we are on our island. Come over to our coconut shack, step on the power pad, try to get 3 of these knocked down, and I got them knocked down in time, so I collect my power cell, and then I can come over and collect 2 more power cells, or 3 more I guess, and that will let me into my building. Alright. So that mostly works. A couple things I want to do to clean up, and you'll want to do yourself, is that we want to make it so that they have to actually play the game to get into the building. So we need to delete one of our power cells that we've got out in the scene. So I'll do that now. And then in my case, I need to deselect the static box for my door. Remember, I made this whole model static when I was doing light mapping, but if I leave the door static, then it's not going to show the sliding animation. So I need to, once I've done the light mapping, then I need to go back in, choose the door, and deselect static. After this, you're essentially done with the game. There's another thing you could do, is we haven't done light mapping for the outpost itself. I'll show you very quickly how to do that. So because I'm going to do light mapping again, I'm going to re-select static for my door so that it will be included in the light mapping. Then I'll select my coconut shy building and make it static, and all of its children static as well. Then I'll open up my light mapping, and it should already be set up because I've done light mapping in the past. I haven't changed anything other than to add my coconut shack, and so I can bake the scene. And this will take some time, so I'll pause the video and come back when the baking is finished and show you another final step we need to do to make sure both the targets work and the door. So hang on and I'll be right back. Okay, well, several minutes have passed and our light mapping is done. Let me show you what it looks like and show you why we're going to need to make one more change. So I come into my island again and come over to my coconut shack, and now you can see it's got these great shadows from the trees on it, showing down on the ground here. But now if I go to play my game, let me get up onto get in the right position here. You'll notice that now the targets aren't going to move because I set them to static. So we need to fix that. So go back to your coconut shy model, come over to the inspector, and deselect the static box, say yes to all children, and then go to the outpost model as well, and expand it out and select door, and deselect static there. Now when you go in, you should be able to play the coconut game and have the targets fall over. And that's it. Thanks for watching this lesson.